She's had a massive stroke. She needs to be airlifted to regional medical immediately, or she won't make it through the night. Can you authorize the transport? Those were the words the paramedic spoke to my husband over the phone. And his response? How much does that cost? Can't she just take an ambulance? I didn't hear this conversation myself. I was on the floor of our kitchen, the left side of my body completely numb, my vision blurred, unable to form words. But later, when I woke up in the ICU with monitors beeping and tubes everywhere, a young paramedic named Tom found me. He felt he needed to tell me the truth about what had been said. And I want you to understand something. I'm 67 years old. I've been married for 42 years, raised 2 children, worked full-time while managing our household, and put my husband through graduate school by working double shifts. I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. I was wrong. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. Wherever you are right now, whatever you're doing while you listen to this, I'd love to know. Are you at home? Driving to work? Lying in bed at 3 a.m. because you can't sleep? Drop a comment and tell me where you are. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe, because what I'm about to share needs to be heard. It needs to be remembered. Let me take you back to that kitchen. It was a Tuesday evening in October, crisp fall weather, the kind of evening where everything should have been perfect. I was making Brian's favorite pot roast, the same recipe I'd perfected over 4 decades of marriage. Our 50th anniversary was coming up in 2 months, and I'd been planning a small gathering. Nothing fancy, just family and a few close friends. I'd already bought a new dress, reserved the community center, even ordered a cake from the bakery across town. Brian was in his study, as usual. Since he retired from his position as a university professor 3 years ago, he'd spent most of his time in there, writing what he called his legacy, a memoir about his academic career. I rarely went in anymore. The few times I'd asked about it, he'd made it clear my input wasn't welcome. I was slicing carrots when it happened. The knife fell from my hand first. I remember watching it clatter to the floor, but I couldn't understand why I'd dropped it. Then my left arm went heavy, dead weight hanging at my side. I tried to call out to Brian, but the words came out slurred, incomprehensible. My left leg buckled and I went down, my head hitting the cabinet on the way. I lay there on the cold tile floor, trying to understand what was happening to my body. Stroke. The word floated through my confused mind. This is a stroke. I needed to get to Brian, needed help, but I couldn't move. Couldn't call out loud enough for him to hear over the classical music playing in his study. Time became strange. I don't know how long I was there. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. At some point, I heard footsteps. Brian, coming to see why dinner wasn't ready. I felt a flash of relief. He'd find me, call 911, everything would be okay. Margaret? His voice sounded annoyed more than concerned. What are you doing on the floor? I tried to speak, manage something that sounded like "elp." He knelt down, and I could see his face, irritation giving way to recognition of what was happening. He pulled out his phone and dialed. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. I know, because I could see the kitchen clock from where I lay. They were efficient, professional, asking Brian questions, checking my vitals, loading me onto a stretcher. That's when I heard the lead paramedic, Tom, talking to Brian. "Sir, your wife has had a major stroke. Time is critical here. We need to get her to Regional Medical Center. They have a specialized stroke unit, but it's 60 miles away. We need to airlift her. Can you authorize the transport?" There was a pause. I remember that pause so clearly because I was lying there, unable to speak, waiting to hear my husband of 42 years do what any spouse would do, say yes, save her, whatever it costs. Instead, I heard him say, "How much does that cost?" Tom's voice was careful. "Sir, I understand cost is a concern, but without immediate specialized treatment, your wife could die or have permanent, severe disability." "But how much?" Brian pressed. "The helicopter transport is around $45,000. Insurance might cover some of it." "That's ridiculous. Can't she just take an ambulance?" "We have an ambulance right here." "Sir, an ambulance will take 2 hours in traffic. Your wife doesn't have 2 hours." I wanted to scream, to grab Brian and shake him, but I was trapped in a body that wouldn't respond. "I need to think about this," Brian said. "This is a major expense. We're on a fixed income. I have to consider our financial future." Tom's voice turned cold. "Mr. Peterson, your wife is dying. This decision needs to be made now. Fine. Take the ambulance. We'll see what they can do at County General." Tom looked at me then, our eyes meeting. I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Pity, yes, but also anger, disgust. He made a decision in that moment. "Mr. Peterson, I'm calling the helicopter anyway. This is a medical emergency, and I have the authority to make this call without your consent when the patient's life is at immediate risk. Now wait just a minute. I'm her husband. I make the financial decisions in this family. Not when it comes to emergency medical care. You don't. The helicopter is coming." Everything after that was a blur. The helicopter ride, the emergency room at Regional, doctors moving fast, speaking in medical terms I couldn't understand. Someone held my hand during the initial exam. I thought it was Brian. It wasn't. It was a nurse named Sarah who kept saying, "You're doing great, Margaret. Stay with us." When I woke up the first time, it was dark. I couldn't tell if it was the same night or days later. My head felt stuffed with cotton. When I tried to move my left arm, it responded, sluggishly, but it worked. My leg, too. Relief washed through me, followed immediately by crushing anxiety. Where was Brian? Was he here? Did he know I was okay? A nurse appeared, different from before. Older, with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. "Margaret? Can you hear me, honey? Squeeze my hand if you can understand me." I squeezed. It felt weak, but definite. "Good. That's very good. You're at Regional Medical Center. You've had a stroke, but you got here in time. The doctors were able to administer clot-busting medication. You're going to be okay, but you have a long recovery ahead." I tried to speak. The words came out garbled, but better than before. "My husband?" The nurse's expression changed subtly. "He's been notified. We've called him several times to update him on your condition." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He hasn't come to visit yet. He said he'd try to make it tomorrow." Try to make it. Tomorrow. I'd had a stroke, nearly died, and he'd try to make it tomorrow. The nurse squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry, honey. I know that's hard to hear, but you're not alone. There's someone else who's been here. A young woman named Elena Martinez. She was in the waiting room all night. She's the one who brought you some things from home. Your glasses, your phone charger. She said to tell you she's not leaving until you're okay." Elena. The name felt like a lifeline thrown across dark water. Elena Martinez, who I hadn't seen in nearly 10 years. How did she even know I was here? The nurse helped me take a small sip of water. She heard about it on the local news scanner. There was a brief mention of the helicopter transport from your neighborhood. She recognized your address and drove straight here. I thought back to Elena, trying to remember her clearly through the fog in my brain. She'd worked at the library where I'd been head librarian for 30 years, just 24 years old, fresh out of community college, struggling to make ends meet. She'd been so bright, so eager to learn, but life had dealt her a rough hand. Single mother to a 3-year-old daughter, no family support, working 2 jobs just to afford her tiny apartment. I'd taken her under my wing, trained her, mentored her, helped her get promoted. When her car broke down and she couldn't afford repairs, I'd lent her money. When she couldn't find affordable childcare, I'd watched little Sophia after work, letting them both stay for dinner, sending them home with leftovers. It was just what you did for people who were trying their best, who just needed a little help to get on their feet. When she'd gotten a better job at the university library 2 years later and moved to the next town over, we'd lost touch. Life got busy, as it does. But she'd remembered. And she'd come. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Elena visited every day, sometimes twice. She brought me books, magazines, fresh flowers. She'd sit and read to me when my vision was still too blurry to read myself, tell me about her daughter, now 13 and thriving. She'd become the assistant director at the university library. had bought a small house, was finally stable and happy. And she kept saying the same thing. "You changed my life, Mrs. Peterson. When nobody else believed in me, you did. I owe you everything." Brian visited once. On the third day, he stayed for 20 minutes, most of which he spent explaining why the helicopter transport had been an unnecessary expense. How we were going to have to tighten our belts, maybe cancel the anniversary party, definitely cancel the trip to Seattle we'd planned for next spring. He didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't hold my hand, didn't say he'd been worried or scared or relieved. When the doctor came in to check on me, Brian peppered him with questions about the bill, about whether we could dispute the helicopter charge, about how long I'd need to stay because the daily room rate was astronomical. The doctor, a young neurologist named Dr. Patel, looked at Brian with barely concealed contempt. "Mr. Peterson, your wife is alive because of that helicopter. She received treatment within the critical window. Without it, she'd likely be severely disabled or dead. Perhaps you should focus on that rather than the bill." After Brian left, Dr. Patel sat down next to my bed. "Mrs. Peterson, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Do you feel safe at home with your husband?" The question stunned me. He's just worried about money." "Is he?" Dr. Patel's voice was gentle but firm, because in my experience, when someone's spouse is having a medical emergency, their first concern is their spouse's survival, not the cost. "The paramedic filed a report about your husband's initial refusal of transport. That's concerning. He didn't refuse, he just asked questions. He delayed critical care to argue about money. That's a form of medical neglect, Mrs. Peterson." Medical neglect. The words settled over me like ice water. Was that what it was? Or was Brian just being practical, thinking about our future, making sure we'd be financially secure? I'd spent 42 years making excuses for him, for his sharp words when I didn't have dinner ready on time, for forgetting my birthday 3 years running, for never once in our entire marriage telling me I looked beautiful, for the way he'd roll his eyes when I talked about my work at the library, as if children's literacy programs were trivial compared to his important academic research. I told myself he was just focused, driven, that his love language was providing financially, that I was being too sensitive. But lying in that hospital bed, unable to ignore the contrast between Elena's daily presence and Brian's single obligatory visit, I started to see my marriage differently. Started to see what 42 years of emotional starvation looked like when you finally had something to compare it to. Elena arrived that evening with Chinese takeout, the good kind from the restaurant downtown, not the cheap stuff. "I know the hospital food is terrible," she said, setting up containers on my rolling table. "And I remembered you love Kung Pao chicken," she remembered. After 10 years, she remembered my favorite dish. My husband of 42 years consistently brought home sesame chicken because it was his favorite, despite me telling him repeatedly I didn't like it. "Elena," I managed to say, my speech improving daily, "why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything." She looked at me with such intensity, I had to look away. "Mrs. Peterson, do you remember the night I came to you crying because I'd been evicted? Because my ex had emptied our joint bank account and I couldn't make rent?" I did remember. She'd been so young, so scared, holding her daughter who was barely more than a baby. "You didn't just lend me money. You let us move into your spare room for 3 months. You wouldn't let me pay rent. You said I needed to save for a deposit on a new place. You watched Sophia while I worked. You helped me file for child support. You drove me to court when I was too scared to go alone. That was just the right thing to do." "No." Elena's voice was fierce. "Most people would have said they were sorry and moved on. You opened your home. You fought for me. You treated me like family when my own family had abandoned me. Do you know what you taught me? You taught me what real love looks like. Not the kind that keeps score or demands payback, but the kind that shows up because it's the right thing to do." Tears ran down my face. I couldn't stop them. "And when I heard you were here," Elena continued, "and I called the hospital, and they told me your husband hadn't been by, hadn't even called to check on you that first day, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Someone needed to show up for you the way you showed up for me. He's busy," I heard myself say, the old excuse automatic. "Mrs. Peterson." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. Please don't do that. Don't make excuses for someone who couldn't be bothered to come see if you were alive or dead. The truth of that hit me like a physical blow. Brian hadn't come that first day. Or the second. The nurses had called him repeatedly with updates, and he'd said thank you and hung up. He hadn't rushed to my bedside, hadn't sat in the waiting room praying I'd pull through. He'd stayed home, probably working on his memoir, irritated by the interruption to his routine. Over the next week, things crystallized. The hospital social worker, a woman named Patricia, came to discuss my discharge plan. I'd need physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. I'd need help at home with daily tasks for at least a month. Is your husband prepared to provide care? Patricia asked. I thought about Brian, who'd never once made me a meal in 42 years of marriage, who'd never done his own laundry, who considered it an imposition if I asked him to pick up groceries on his way home. I don't think so, I admitted. Do you have other family? Children? 2 children. My son David lives in California. My daughter Ashley lives across town. Have they visited? David had called once, briefly. He was busy with work, had a big project, would try to come see me when things calmed down. Ashley had sent a text. Dad says, you're fine. Glad you're okay. Crazy busy with the kids. We'll visit soon. Neither had come. Not yet, I said quietly. Patricia made notes. Mrs. Peterson, I'm going to be very direct with you. You're not going to get the support you need at home. I've seen this before. Patients go home expecting family to help, and they end up alone, struggling, sometimes having setbacks because they're not getting proper care. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you consider a short-term rehabilitation facility, somewhere you can get intensive therapy and support until you're ready to be fully independent again. The thought of going to a facility, of admitting that I couldn't rely on my own husband, was devastating. But it was also, I realized, realistic. How much does that cost? I asked, and immediately hated myself for sounding like Brian. Your insurance should cover most of it. Let me check. She pulled out her laptop and started typing. While she worked, Elena appeared in the doorway. She'd brought lunch again, and she had someone with her. A young teenage girl with Elena's dark eyes and bright smile. Mrs. Peterson, I want you to meet someone. This is my daughter, Sophia. The girl approached my bed shyly. Hi, Mrs. Peterson. My mom has told me so much about you. She says you're the reason we have our house and why I got to stay in my good school district. I just wanted to say thank you. I looked at this poised, articulate young woman and thought about the scared toddler I'd read bedtime stories to all those years ago. It's wonderful to meet you, Sophia. Your mother tells me you're doing very well in school. I'm going to college, Sophia said proudly. I want to be a librarian like you and my mom. I want to help people the way you helped us. Something inside me broke and healed at the same time. Here was the legacy that mattered. Not Brian's academic papers that nobody read, not the anniversary party that probably wouldn't happen, but this young woman who wanted to help people because she'd been helped. Patricia looked up from her computer. Mrs. Peterson, I have good news. Your insurance will cover 80% of a 30-day stay at Meadowbrook Rehabilitation Center. It's one of the best facilities in the state. And the other 20%? About $6,000. I thought about the savings account I'd carefully built over years of working. The account that was in both our names, but that I'd contributed to far more than Brian, saving a little from each paycheck even when money was tight. I can cover that, I said. Are you sure? That's a significant expense. I'm sure. What I didn't say was that I was sure about more than just the facility. I was sure that I needed space from Brian. Sure that I needed time to think clearly. Sure that something fundamental had shifted in me, and I needed to figure out what came next. The day I was transferred to Meadowbrook, Brian came to the hospital. Not to accompany me, but to sign paperwork and complain about the expense. This is completely unnecessary, he said. You could recover just as well at home. Who would help me at home, Brian? The question came out sharper than I intended. Who would make sure I get to therapy? Who would help me shower? Help me with exercises? I would, he said, but we both knew it was a lie. When have you ever helped me with anything? The words hung in the air. Brian's face flushed. That's not fair, Margaret. I've provided for this family for 42 years, and I've worked full-time for 35 of those years while also running the household, raising the children, and putting you through graduate school. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about showing up. I'm talking about caring enough to visit your wife in the hospital more than once in 10 days. I've been busy. Doing what, Brian? What is so important that you couldn't come see if I was going to live or die? He didn't answer, just gathered his papers and left, and I felt relieved to see him go. Meadowbrook was nothing like I expected. It was bright, clean, filled with people working hard to recover from strokes, accidents, surgeries. My roommate was a woman named Dorothy, 72, recovering from a hip replacement. She was funny, sharp, with no patience for self-pity. My husband visits every day, she told me the first evening. Brings me terrible coffee from the machine downstairs because he knows I hate the coffee here. Sits and reads me the newspaper even though I can read it myself. Just likes being here. That's lovely, I said, trying not to feel the ache in my chest. 48 years we've been married. Not all of them easy, mind you, but when the chips are down, he shows up. That's what matters. She looked at me curiously. Your husband coming tomorrow? I don't know, I admitted. Dorothy nodded slowly. My daughter had a husband like that. Married 15 years before she finally had enough. You know what she says now? She says she wasted 15 years waiting for him to become the man she needed him to be. Says her only regret is not leaving sooner. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into therapy. Physical therapy to regain full strength in my left side. Occupational therapy to relearn daily tasks. Speech therapy to smooth out the slight slur that remained. And with Elena visiting 3 times a week, I started to see my life from a new angle. Elena had made something of herself, had raised a daughter alone, had bought a house, built a career, created a life filled with purpose and love. She'd done all of that without a partner, without someone who was supposed to be her support but actually just took from her. One evening, after a particularly grueling PT session, Elena found me crying in my room. What happened? Are you in pain? I wasted my life, I said. 42 years with a man who doesn't love me, who couldn't even bother to make sure I didn't die. Elena sat down and took my hand. You didn't waste your life. You lived it the best way you knew how. You raised children. You helped people like me. You made a difference. But I stayed with someone who treats me like an inconvenience. So, don't stay anymore. The simplicity of that statement was stunning. Don't stay anymore. Like it was that easy. I'm 67 years old, Elena. I don't have time to start over. You don't have time not to, she countered. Mrs. Peterson, my mom died at 68. One day she was here, the next she was gone. Every single day matters. Do you want to spend whatever time you have left with someone who couldn't be bothered to come see you in the hospital? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dorothy's daughter, about the 15 years she said she'd wasted. I'd wasted 42. But it wasn't too late. I wasn't dead yet. The stroke had taken some things from me, but it had also given me clarity. The next day, I called a lawyer from the facility. Her name was Ruth Henderson, and she specialized in divorce and estate planning for older adults. She came to see me at Meadowbrook, bringing paperwork and a calm, professional demeanor. Tell me about your situation, she said. So I did. All of it. The marriage, the stroke, Brian's response, the realization that I'd spent decades with someone who didn't actually care about me as a person. And what do you want to do? Ruth asked when I finished. I want a divorce. And I want to make sure that if something happens to me, Brian doesn't get everything I've worked for. Let's talk about your assets. We spent 2 hours going through everything. The house, which we owned jointly. The savings, mostly mine. My pension from the library, Brian's pension from the university. My life insurance policy, which still listed Brian as the sole beneficiary. I want to change my beneficiary, I said. To who? To Elena Martinez, and I want to set up a trust for her daughter Sophia's education. Ruth didn't blink. That's certainly your right. And your will? I want to leave the house to my children, but everything else, my savings, my personal property. I want that to go to Elena. Mrs. Peterson, I have to ask. Are you certain about this? These are significant changes. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Over the next week, Ruth prepared the paperwork. Divorce petition. New will. Beneficiary changes on all my accounts. Medical power of attorney. Switching from Brian to Elena. It felt like shedding a skin I'd worn too long. Restrictive and uncomfortable, but so familiar I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. I told Elena what I was doing. She cried, tried to refuse. I can't accept this. It's too much. Elena, you showed up when nobody else did. You treated me like family, when my own family couldn't be bothered. This is what family does. They take care of each other. But what about your children? My children can have the house. They'll be fine. But you changed your whole life because of a kindness I showed you years ago. You showed me what real love looks like. You deserve this. The day I was discharged from Meadowbrook, Brian came to pick me up. Not because he wanted to, but because the facility required someone to sign me out and transport me home. He barely spoke on the drive, just complained about the cost of the facility and how we'd need to economize. When we got home, he helped me inside, then immediately went to his study. I stood in our kitchen, looking at the spot where I'd fallen, where my life had almost ended and in some ways had actually begun. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. Then I called Ruth. I'm ready to serve him, I said. The next morning, a process server arrived while Brian was eating breakfast. He answered the door, accepted the envelope, opened it without much interest. I watched his face change as he read. What the hell is this? Divorce papers, I said calmly. You're divorcing me? After 42 years? Yes. Why? Because I questioned the cost of a helicopter? Because I'm practical about money? No, Brian. Because you couldn't be bothered to come see if I was alive or dead. Because in 42 years of marriage, you've treated me like hired help, not a partner. Because I almost died and you didn't care. That's not true. Of course I cared. Then why didn't you come to the hospital? He sputtered. Started to speak. Stopped. You have no answer, I said. Because there is no good answer. You chose your comfort over my life. And I'm choosing myself over this marriage. You can't do this. We're a team. We have a history. We have a history of you taking and me giving. I'm done. He tried anger next. You'll regret this. You'll be alone. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who makes me feel alone. I stood up, steadier on my feet than I'd been in weeks. You can stay in the house until the divorce is finalized. I'm going to stay with a friend. What friend? You don't have friends. Actually, I do. I have someone who cares about me more than you ever did. I called Elena, and she came within the hour, helped me pack a bag, drove me to her house. Her spare room was small but cheerful, with a window overlooking a garden. Are you sure about this? She asked. I've never been more sure of anything. That night, I slept better than I had in years. No snoring husband next to me, no resentment weighing on my chest. Just quiet, peace, possibility. Over the next few months, the divorce proceeded. Brian fought it, of course. Tried to claim I wasn't of sound mind due to the stroke. Ruth demolished that argument with medical records showing my full recovery and cognitive function. Tried to claim he deserved more because he'd been the primary earner. Ruth showed he'd earned more because I'd put him through graduate school and supported him while he established his career. In the end, we split the house equity. I kept my pension and savings, he kept his pension, and I moved forward. Elena and I became closer than ever, genuine family in all the ways that mattered. Sophia started calling me Grandma Margaret, and I loved it. I volunteered at the library again, started a program for single parents, helping them the way I'd helped Elena. And I discovered something profound. I was happier at 67, divorced and starting over, than I'd been in decades of marriage. Brian tried to reconcile once. Showed up at Elena's house with flowers, saying he'd made mistakes, asking for another chance. I stood on the porch and looked at this man I'd spent most of my life with, and I felt nothing. No anger, no longing, just a mild sadness for all the years we'd both wasted. No, I said simply, but I've changed. I realize now what I lost. You didn't lose anything, Brian. You never valued it in the first place. You can't lose something you never appreciated. My children were upset at first. How could I do this to their father? How could I leave the family home? But gradually, they started to see it too. Ashley confided that she'd been shocked when her father didn't rush to the hospital. David admitted he'd learned his own emotional distance from watching his father. They didn't understand my decision to leave my estate to Elena, but I didn't need them to understand. It was my choice, my money, my legacy. Now, at 68, I have a life I love. I live in a small apartment near the library. I see Elena and Sophia regularly. I've made new friends, joined a book club, started painting classes I'd always wanted to take, but Brian said were a waste of time. I'm healthy, strong, independent. And when people ask if I regret divorcing after 42 years of marriage, I tell them the truth. My only regret is not doing it sooner. Because here's what I learned from almost dying on my kitchen floor. Life is too short to spend it with people who don't show up. Too precious to waste on relationships where you give and get nothing back. Too valuable to settle for someone who treats your life as less important than the cost of saving it. My stroke didn't kill me, but it did kill my tolerance for being treated as if I didn't matter. So if you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're with someone who makes you feel small, who takes you for granted, who wouldn't rush to your bedside in an emergency, I want you to know something. You deserve better. It's never too late to choose yourself. Never too late to demand to be treated with the love and respect you deserve. And that person who shows up, that person who remembers your favorite meal and sits with you in the hospital and fights for you when you can't fight for yourself, that's your real family. Blood doesn't make family. Showing up does. Caring does. Being there when it matters most does. So here's my message to you. Stop settling. Stop making excuses for people who don't cherish you. Stop waiting for someone to become who they're never going to be. Life is happening right now, and you deserve to spend it surrounded by people who actually care. Brian chose himself over my life, and I chose to learn from that. I chose to walk away. I chose to build something new with people who actually valued me. And you know what? That's the best revenge there is. Not hurting him, not punishing him, just living well without him. Being happy, being free, being surrounded by genuine love. That's my story. That's my truth, and I hope it helps someone out there realize they deserve better too. Because you do. We all do. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a hard choice about a relationship? Have you ever chosen yourself when everyone said you shouldn't? Drop your story in the comments. Hit that like button if this resonated. Subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and knowing your worth. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening to mine.